Hey everybody, I'm going to be talking about Ezekiel chapter 1 today and 1 Kings chapter 7. We're going to be making some comparisons here and there just to see if you can see what I see in this dream of Ezekiel's. So let's start off with Ezekiel chapter 1, okay? So it says, "Now it came to pass on the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, the land of the Chaldeans, by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire." Now, we're seeing here a picture. First we see a whirlwind coming out of the north, and then we see a great cloud. So we have two different things, a whirlwind and a cloud. And then it says, and a fire enfolding itself. So sort of like a fire within itself. And a brightness was about it. So there's a brightness around this fire enfolding itself. And out of the mist thereof, as the color of amber, out of the mist of the fire. Okay, so that's verse 4 only that I've touched on so far. Verse 4. Well, I actually touched on the first 4 verses, but we're stopping at verse 4 because that's where the dream is sort of like kicking in. Now it says in 1 Kings chapter 7, "But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He built also the house of the forest of Lebanon." So he built also the house of the forest of Lebanon, meaning from the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. And it was covered with cedar above upon the beams, that lay on 45 pillars, 15 in a row. And there were windows in 3 rows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. And all the doors and posts were square with the windows, and the light was against light in 3 ranks. Are you hearing this? Light against light in 3 ranks. And in verse 4 it talks about, first he beholds a whirlwind came out of the north, then a great cloud, then a fire enfolding within itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the mist, well actually I think the fire within itself is 1, so let's just count that as 1. And then the brightness was about it, and out of the mist thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. So there's three different mentions of light within itself. Like you got the first a fire unfolding in itself, then a brightness about it, and then out of the mist thereof as the color of amber out of the mist of the fire. Three sets of lights. And in 1 Kings chapter 7, you have the windows in 3 rows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. 3 different sets of light. Okay? So far you're following me, I hope. We have 3 sets of light in both of these. One's with windows, and one is using fire in the color of amber. Now, verse 5 in Ezekiel. Also out of the mist thereof came the likeness of four living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Alright, so there's 4 living creatures. And here it says, and all the doors and posts were square. How many sides does a square have? 4 sides. With the windows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. Then he goes on to say, and he made a porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits. And the porch was before them, and the other pillars, and the thick beam were before them. Then he made a porch for the throne where he might judge, even the porch of judgment. And it was covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. And his house where he dwelt had another court within the porch, which was of the like work. Solomon made also a house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife, like unto the porch. Okay? So all these were of costly stones, according to the measures of hewed stones, sawed with saws, within and without, even from the foundation unto the coping, and so on the outside toward the great court. So everything's done with hand, everything's done with saws and everything. No machines, everything's using the work of their own hands. But the thing is, you're constantly seeing this thing within a thing within a thing. Just like you started off with Ezekiel. Now let's go back to Ezekiel, and we're in verse 6 now, after the likeness of a man, and then it said, and every one had 4 faces. How many faces does a square have? 4 faces. Has 4 sides and 4 faces. And every one had 4 wings. So 4 corners on each of the squares. So in other words, each of the faces had wings on all 4 sides and all 4 faces. I think it's interesting that see, it says everyone had 4 faces and everyone had 4 wings, so you have the 4 faces and you think of a cube. However, a cube has 6 faces. So where's the top and where's the bottom? However, it doesn't say anything about a top and a bottom. It just says the 4 faces. So you have the north, south, east, and west. There's nothing about a top and a bottom because there's no need for it. The top and the bottom just aren't there. So it still fits in the cube pattern. Anyway, moving on, we have verse 7 in Ezekiel chapter 1. And their feet were straight, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. Let's go back to 1 Kings chapter 7. Okay, so we talked about all the stones and everything, and then we're on verse 10 now with 1 Kings chapter 7. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. Interesting how they use those numbers. I'll have to discuss those numbers later. And above were costly stones after the measures of hewed stones and cedars. And the great court round about was with 3 rows of hewed stones, and a row of cedar beams, both for the inner court of the house of the Lord, and for the porch of the house. Inner court and the porch. We'll discuss that in a little bit. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass. What didn't we just talk about brass? Let's see. It says in verse 7 of Ezekiel, and their feet were straight, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. Are you seeing the similarities now? And they had the hands of a man under their wings, on their 4 sides. And they 4 had their faces and their wings. So in other words, they had the hands of a man under the wings, sort of like, I guess, holding the wings in place. Sort of like God's in the center, or Christ, Jesus is in the center, the temple. Because the hands of a man are under the wings on all 4 sides, meaning all 4 sides are consistent of men. In other words, it's not just the Son of God that's on these sides, but it's actually men on each of these sides. How many tribes of Israel are there? There's 12. And when they're encamped, there's 3 sets on each of the sides. You have 3 camped to the north, 3 camped to the south, 3 camped to the east, and 3 camped to the west. Those 3, 3, 3, 3. Remember those windows we were talking about. So, anyway, going back to the working in brass in verse 14. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high a piece, and a line of 12 cubits did compass either of them about. Alright, what's these 2 pillars representative of? The 2 tribes of Judah. Caleb and Joshua are usually the most significant ones whenever you think about the tribes of Judah. And then it says 12 round about them, though, as well. So in other words, it's the united front. All of Israel together is united now, with these 12 other tied to it. So it's, in other words, these two pillars are each consistent of the 12 tribes of Israel. You have Israel and Judah, meaning they are one and the same. However, they can also be considered the two witnesses in Christ. But let's continue reading just so we can think a little bit more. Because then we get to 16 and it says, and he made 2 chapters of molten brass to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of one chapter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other was 5 cubits. So we have 2 chapters of molten brass. Now, if you don't know what a chapter is, let's show you what a chapter is. Alright, let me just go to Google and CHAPTER. Definition. Ornamental head or capital of a pillar. That's what it is. And they're molten. I find it interesting that they use the word molten here. Where else do we see molten but whenever they're talking about the, well, whenever they're talking about the lake of fire? Well, let's continue. We'll talk about that a little bit more. 17 says, verse 17 in chapter 7, and nets of checker work and wreaths of chain work, for the chapters were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for the one chapter and 7 for the other. 7. In Leviticus chapter 26, you see 7 times the iniquities happen. 7 is also how many animals in pairs. 7 times 2 is 14, but they counted them as 1. So 7 animals of cattle, 7 animals of birds, and then 7 days before the flood happened. There's that 7. And he made the pillars and 2 rows round about upon the one network to cover the chapters that were upon the top with pomegranates, and so did he for the other chapter. I want you to notice how they're covering these things. Weren't the wings covering the hands of the man in Ezekiel? And then it goes on to say, and the chapters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work in the porch, 4 cubits. And the chapters upon the 2 pillars had pomegranates also above, over against the belly which was by the network. And the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon the other chapter. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple. And he set up the right pillar and called the name thereof Jachin. And he set up the left pillar and called the name thereof Boaz. Why do these names need to be for a pillar? Are they just symbolic of an actual pillar? I don't think so. If you go to Google and put in Hebrew meaning of Boaz, means swiftness. God tells us that he will be swift in his coming. And then there was, what was the other one? Jachin? Yeah. Jachin. Jachin. He will establish. And I'm saying it wrong. Apparently it's Yakin. That's how it's supposed to be said. He will establish his Yakin, and swiftly is Boaz. Those are the two pillars' names. He will establish quickly. He's coming soon. Anyway, let's move on. And he made a molten sea, 10 cubits, from the one brim to the other. It was round all about, and his height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. A molten sea. There is your lake of fire. And it also says 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. Each of the kings that serves with the beast will share 1 day with the beast. And how many kings are there? There's 10. Symbolism is very powerful in the Bible. And under the brim of it round about there were knops compassing it, 10 in a cubit, compassing the sea round about. The knops were cast in 2 rows when it was cast. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking north, south, east. I'm not pointing in the right directions. I'm just basically giving gestures. And west. Remember how I told you that 3 were north, 3 were south, 3 were east, 3 were west? Those windows we were talking about. Going back to Ezekiel chapter 1. And their feet were straight, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. Didn't we just read that it was about oxen? It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward, meaning they were all straight. The feet were straight. And the sole of the foot was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. These things are all in brass in the temple. And then it says, and under the brim of it round about there were knops compassing it. Under. Let's focus on that for a second. So, let's read a little bit more of Ezekiel chapter 1. And they had hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides. Under. And under the brim of it round about there were knops compassing it, 10 in a cubit, compassing the sea round about. Under. 10 tribes of Israel and 2 tribes of Judah. 10. And they had the hands of a man we were talking about. So verse 10, it says, As for the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left side. They four also had the face of an eagle. These 4 faces are the symbols for the tribes of Israel. One of them, one set, like you have the north, south, and east, and west. There's 12 different symbols for the tribes, but there were 4 representative symbols. You have the, let me bring up my picture real quick so I don't get confused. Let's see, where is it? Alright. So, on the camp of Ephraim, it was the west side, the ox, and it consisted of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. On the camp of Reuben's side, the man, you have Reuben, Simeon, and Gad tribes. Camp of Judah is on the east, the right side, right hand of God. The camp of Judah, the lion, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. And then the camp of Dan, the eagle, and that is to the north, Dan, Naphtali, and Asher. Anyway, that's how I'm seeing this, is I believe Ezekiel's dream is seeing the end days temple with God within it. But let's continue. Verse 10, As for the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man, and the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left. They four had the face of an eagle. Thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings of every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies. We talked about those 2 pillars, how it had the 12 cubits, meaning they were all joined to another, each of these cubits. And 2 covered their bodies. Talked about the chapiters and the pomegranates and the lilies and all this. And they went, every one straight forward, whither the Spirit was to go, they went, and they turned not when they went. When they went to battle, each of these tribes would have their own direction to go. And it would round the camp about in a circle, so they didn't miss any, well, in a square, so they didn't miss any enemy. And for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and like the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. God was dwelling with the Israelites here. We talked about in the beginning how, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind, and out of the north, and a great cloud. God travels within the clouds surrounding Israel. And he is that whirlwind. The whirlwind is symbolic of that great wind coming in Revelations. Think about that. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning, meaning they would go out to do battle and then return immediately. Well, that's one way of looking at it. You could also think about how the Israelite people had at some point sinned, but eventually they would come back to God almost like a flash in God's time, because one day into God is like 1,000 years into us. So it's like a flash of lightning happening. That's another way of interpreting it. We would go away from God and then we would immediately return. During the times of the judges, the Israelite people would sin and then they would turn from their evil ways and come back to God. Then it says, "Now as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures, with his 4 faces. And the appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of a beryl. And they 4 had one likeness, and their appearance, and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel." This is definitely in 1 Kings chapter 7. Alright, so we talked about it standing upon the 12 oxen, so I'm going to start from, let's go ahead and read verse 25 again. "It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, west, south, and east, and the sea was set upon them, and all their hinder parts were inward. And it was a handbreadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 baths, and he made 10 bases of brass." The feet, bases. "4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height thereof. 4, 4, and 3. And the work of the bases was on this manner. They had borders, and the borders were between the ledges. And on the borders that were between the ledges were lions, oxen, and cherubims." That's very symbolic as well, but I don't think it's related to Ezekiel, but more towards Revelations. But we're not talking about Revelations right now. But it's still symbolic towards the tribes of Israel. "And every base had 4 brazen wheels." 4 brazen wheels. We just talked about wheels in Ezekiel also being 4. "And plates of brass, and the 4 corners thereof had undersetters molten." Under the laver were undersetters molten at the side of every edition. And the mouth of it within the chapter and above was a cubit, but the mouth thereof was round after the work of the base, a cubit and a half. And also upon the mouth of it were gravings with their borders, 4 square, not round. And under the borders were 4 wheels, 4 more wheels. And the axle trees of the wheels were joined to the base, a wheel within a wheel. And the height of a wheel was a cubit, and a half a cubit. Times and a half, maybe? Maybe. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel, their axletrees, and their naves, and their felloes, and their spokes were all molten. And there were 4 undersetters to the 4 corners of one base, and the undersetters were of the very base itself. And in the top of the base was thereof a round compass of half a cubit high. And on the top of the base the ledges thereof and the borders thereof were of the same. So there are your wheels mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 1. They're also in 1 Kings chapter 7. So what I think is happening here is Ezekiel is seeing the temple. He's not actually seeing just any creatures. It is a dream, of course, but I believe what's represented within his dream is the up-and-coming future temple where they all dwell with God. Because it says, and the living creatures went, the wheels went by them, and up from the earth the wheels were lifted up. Whithersoever the Spirit was to go, they went, thither was their spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Is this not the Holy Spirit that is within the wheels, within the walls of Israel? He lifts them up. Wherever he goes, they go. He is within them. Spirit is within the wheels. When those went, these went, and when those stood, these stood, and when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creature was the color of the terrible crystal, stretched over their heads above. And under the firmament were their wings straight, the one toward the other. Every one had 2, which covered on this side, and every one had 2, which covered on that side, their bodies. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of great waters, as the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of a host. When they stood, they let down their wings. And there was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads when they stood, and had let down their wings. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone, as the appearance, and upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above it. And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about it, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake. This dream that he's having is, to me, symbolic of the return of Christ in all his glory. with all his kingdom at hand. This is the city of Jerusalem, he's saying. This holy temple coming from the sky. That's what Ezekiel chapter 1 is. That's what I believe it is. You can share a different opinion, that's fine. But you can't ignore the facts that are there within the two chapters, the similarities. And it's not just there, but there's similarities within Revelations as well. You just have to look for them and see. So, thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned something new from this.